The psychology of possible evolution. The development of evolution that is possible for a person on this earth in their lifetime is psychological. Remember that man is created on earth as a self-evolving being capable of self-generated psychological change, development. This work, which begins with self-knowledge, is called self-evolution because it is only through sincere efforts intentionally made by yourself that the possibility of evolution exists. It is in and through the energy of the effort to work that evolution happens. Each person must make their own efforts in order to evolve. No one can evolve automatically or by intellectual understanding, by vicinity, by osmosis, or by knowledge. Only personal inner work effort produces the force for evolution. This process in the work will take you from self-interested psychology to self-transcendent psychology. Awakening from a sleeping mechanical psychology to an intentional conscious psychology is your destiny. It is what each of us is here to do. The fact that this teaching exists is hard proof of God's unconditional love reaching down to us even in our insignificance. His very personal love for each of us individually and equally. The practice of self-remembering. Every student beginning to practice psychological exercises of the work is taught first of all to practice self-remembering in a particular form. You are instructed to call to your attention your remembrance of your most authentic self, recollecting the essential sense of your being, outside of time and events. Several times a day, or when you remember to, practice self-remembering by standing upright within yourself outside of the moment and its influences. It makes no difference whether you follow an alarm clock method of practicing self-remembering or if you simply try to remember yourself. What you will discover first is that indeed you do not remember yourself. You will start remembering that you forget yourself, and this is the beginning of light. Since this exercise relies on something more pure in motivation than rules, legalism rarely works. Keeping a notebook of your experiences may be helpful if this is your style, or it may disrupt the experience of your perception of it if it's not your style. What is important is that you actually practice self-remembering and that you taste that state and remember it. All of the other psychological work practices are different forms and degrees of self-remembering. Self-observation is not self-remembering, although it allows you to observe that you do not remember yourself. This is where the confusion lies between self-observation and self-remembering. Self-remembering and self-observation are very different kinds of psychological activity that touch the same state of consciousness, the third state. Self-awareness and real I belong to this level as well, each resonating to some degree in the others or sharing the same taste of state. The work teaches that bringing the work ideas to the moment of experience, incoming impressions, is also a form of self-remembering. Practicing any work exercise, i.e. self-observation, inner separation, etc., is a form of self-remembering. Remembering your aim is another form. In full self-remembering, it is your real I that is experienced in relation to all things. Your individuality, your nothingness, your interwoven place in the universe. In this state, you feel profound peace and inexpressible enlightenment. It cannot be reproduced to adequate words. Although everyone has had moments of this experience during their lifetime, the practice of self-remembering can intentionally evoke this state and help to develop it into a permanent condition of consciousness. This kind of permanence must be built upon practice. You must remember yourself. No one else can do this for you. Self-observation. Watch. Do not sleep. Self-observation is the most fundamental practice in this teaching. Even more so than self-remembering, because it provides the light of consciousness and the means for developing your real I, the one meant to be remembered in the act of full self-remembering. Everything begins with and depends on self-observation in the work. The subsequent practices and exercises all depend on it and realize illuminated by it. It is consequently critical that your practice of self-observation is refined and accurate. For this, you will need a teacher. When you begin to practice self-observation, you must divide yourself into two sides, an observed side and an observing side. To do so, you must take part of your attention and create a vantage point within your psychology from which you can see yourself objectively. When you try to see yourself from this new position, you should be able to see all at once your outer circumstances, your actions, your words, your attitudes, emotional states, posture, tone of voice and inflection, intentions, motives, facial expressions, and body movements. This kind of awareness takes some practice and only comes in small glimpses at first. Each glimpse is a photograph of yourself that you will remember because of the special quality it has. And each effort to practice self-observation will carry more light because self-observation lets a ray of light from higher consciousness into your psychology. The analogy for practicing self-observation goes like this. You have many eyes, one of which is observing eye, and you are attending a play. The play represents life. The audience, your many different eyes, are each giving their attention to the play and each responding differently to it. Some eyes are excited, some eyes are bored, some are angry, some are pleased. Observing eye turns around from the stage and watches the audience, noticing each eye's reaction to the play, which is life. Remembering to practice self-observation and refining that practice are the first two challenges. Reminding yourself can be a simple matter of taping up notes that say, "Observe yourself all over your environment," or deciding to practice at a particular time every day, or using small tricks which remind you to observe yourself. Once you begin to practice self-observation, you will be horrified at times regarding what you observe. This is the biggest obstacle to overcome in the refining of your practice of self-observation. When you observe yourself and you begin to see the insincerity, the lies and selfishness, and the legion of negative emotions that characterize your inner experience and shape your life, the shock can stop you in your tracks, in a literal way, developmentally speaking. As soon as you feel negative emotions about what you are observing, like guilt, fear, humiliation, frustration, or shame, you are immediately stuck. Since nothing conscious can grow from a negative state, you are effectively stopped. As soon as you begin justifying what you have observed, you are equally stopped. If you are justifying, you may be sure that you are identified and in negative emotions. It is vital to practice self-observation uncritically. You must be able to see everything clearly with a dispassionate eye. This does not mean that you become oblivious to conscience, but you must learn not to ascribe everything to yourself. Doing so is identification, which is the condition you are seeking to change. The process of the work will enlighten you about what to ascribe to yourself, your real I. The first thing to do, in the case of becoming negative in response to what you observe in yourself, is to withdraw the feeling of I from it. Say to this observation, "This is not I." Then turning your observing eye on your negative responses and notice what they say to you. When you say, "This is not I," you are differentiating between your mechanics and your real I, which is clarifying. You are making a small withdrawal of force from the energy of mechanicalness. If you find yourself justifying, simply stop saying the words. Practice inner silence. It will take a long time of actual practice before observing I functions accurately or has any permanence, or before you have experienced enough internal light to verify that the work teaches regarding your own psychology. The light of self-observation shines a ray into the darkness that is the unconscious side of you. This darkness is not evil. You are not instructed to look for whatever evil might be unacknowledged in you. That idea of confronting inner darkness is evil. Your dark side very well contains multitudes of negative emotions, but that is not all. Your dark side is all that remains unobserved and unacknowledged by you, unconscious to you. You cannot change something if you have no awareness of its existence. So real, personal change, which is the aim of esotericism, depends on the light of self-observation first of all. Some of the many reasons the work asks you to observe your negative emotions and states from the beginning is because they are not part of your essence, they are acquired. And, what is most important, they stand squarely in the way of your development. Also, each student in the work is asked not to give expression to negativity from the beginning, as work on being. In doing so, you will begin to see the stranglehold negative emotions have on you, and you will feel their force when you try not to express them. But first, you must be able to observe them. Your practice will show you how you go from complaining to feeling irritable, to speaking and acting with anger, followed by self-justification, feeling dejected and guilty. You will observe inner and outer talking in slanderous terms and find yourself grumbling about how you must endure, worrying about it. You will see how you are constantly being critical about everyone and everything you encounter. And this is what you call discernment. You will notice that you are plagued with dissatisfaction no matter what you have, and you feel anxious and feel fearfully vulnerable. When things are going well, you will be afraid that they will change and you will suffer. When things are not going well, you will be afraid that they won't change and you will suffer. In any case, you are afraid and you're already suffering. You will catch yourself reciting grudges against people and events and circumstances, and you will observe frustration. You will catch yourself gossiping and be shocked by how often you lie, feel insecure, embarrassed, or rejected, or how often you flatter yourself, judge others, and relate to everything in terms of like and dislike. It is very clear that all of this wrong work in your psychology must be eliminated before you can function at a higher level of consciousness. Self-observation is the first step in being to purifying your inner life. and getting rid of the mess and uncleanliness of negative emotions. When you observe a negative I, you are already less under its power. Observing I is not identified and so cannot be captivated. It uses the force of intentionality which would otherwise be engaged in the mechanical negative emotion. Repeatedly observing the same negative emotions weakens them and makes separation from them progressively easier. Students are also asked to observe their false personality in action. This includes attitudes, opinions, preferences, mannerisms, repetitive phrases, postures, body language, facial expressions, and a whole multitude of changing eyes. This stimulus-response multitude is called imaginary I, and it has the illusion of unity. The formation of it comes from ideas you have about who you are. These illusory ideas form pictures of yourself based on imagination, vanity, and self-love. Imaginary I believes that it is the pictures and imagination you have about yourself. But honest self-observation will show you that you are not as you suppose yourself to be. All of the multitude of I's spring from automatic responses which are dictated by your individual acquired personality. Self-observation will show you that you are not your false personality. After you have practiced self-observation for a time, when you have a work memory full of photographs of yourself and verifications, the idea of multiplicity will begin to have more meaning to you. Seeing that you have no stable center or controlling I means that you are not living life. You are only responding to stimuli. That is a very grave bit of understanding which, if you get hold of it, will increase your desire to change. This point in the work can be frighteningly disorienting. Becoming aware of your multiplicity happens in the work process long before your real I or true personality have the strength of presence to save you from the psychological vertigo of feeling your nothingness in the acute manner that self-observation creates. It is here that the first really dangerous place in the work is reached. When you get a first harsh look at all of the hordes of eyes in your psychology over which you have no control, and you see them reacting mechanically to life without your assent, and when you hear them say things that you don't mean, you suddenly feel like a stranger to yourself. You don't recognize the mass of changing eyes as a reflection of how you have always pictured yourself, and so the illusion of unity, an imaginary I, is dissolved. What follows is the question, who am I? And this is the necessary condition that must be reached. In the moment of reality, when you're experiencing your true nothingness, to feel the question, who am I? If your motives are sincere, the response you receive is an assertion of your real I. You begin to perceive your observing I as separate from other eyes in quality and position. It stands apart, above from the other eyes, so to speak, and you can see them in action, remembering that observing I informs and defines real I, and real I stands above observing I. This perception becomes a tangible inner experience as you proceed in the process through self-observation. You begin to feel your sense of self as different from the eyes of false personality. The difference becomes the space between false personality and real I, defining both. But this process takes time, and observing I has the ability to see it before it gains the strength to act. You will feel the falsehood of the eyes of personality and know that this is not I, yet be unable to change anything. What is worse, you won't know what is I, having no developed sense of your real I yet. It takes a level of stable, mature being and accurate instruction to traverse this part of the path. It can be valuable at this point to ask yourself this question: what is it within me that is doing the observing? The answer gives observing eye clarity and definition. The more often you practice self-observation, the more quickly you can pass through this stage in the work as observing eye becomes more defined. In practicing self-observation, observing eye will see the multiplicity of eyes, habitual personality traits, negative emotions, associative thinking, self-justifying, inner considering, fear, and vanity, each vying for your attention and using your energy. At such a moment of seeing, a discerning choice has to be made, one that negates all eyes that are false or negative, and also attracts and affirms all eyes that belong to higher consciousness within you. The faculty that can make this kind of discernment is real conscience, which becomes active in the light of self-observation. Right here, at this point in the process of the work, is where the purity of your motives comes into play. If your work is serious, and your aim is God's will and not your own, then real conscience will discern and choose and inspire you. Otherwise, the opportunity is lost when an eye of personality imagines that it chooses, selecting what pleases it most. In this case, false personality is strengthened and nothing is gained in terms of the work. It is only in the purity and humility of your nothingness that objective, real conscience can illuminate the real eye of your being. So, if you've been working from a false basis, such as a desire for gaining personal power, this is the point at which you'll fail due to your motives. It is a tragedy perpetuated by corrupt schools and corrupt teachers teaching corrupt motives and professing corrupt aims. The work takes the place of real conscience, while your own emerges. Conscience is a function of spirit that needs a degree of purity in order to become active. Self-serving, self-aggrandizing motives haven't the purity to accommodate the activity of conscience. And if you find yourself at this point of choosing in the work process without the assistance of real conscience in discernment and choice, you have no connection with higher mind to guide you. This is a very dangerous psychological position in which to find yourself. Having no direction, you cannot move out of the stage of seeing your multiplicity towards unity and authenticity, and you cannot unknow what you have seen and verified. Such misguided motivation is cosmically criminal because it leads students directly to the point of soul-shattering loss of identity, and it leaves them there, when the real aim of the work is creating unity and authentic I. However, let us suppose that your motives are right, and you do come to the point in the work where you have to choose which eyes to nurture and which to eliminate. To speak in very practical terms, suppose you observe yourself justifying being critical of someone. Well, he's very bad, you know. He's rude and he's stupid, and he caused you great difficulty, even pain. He talks too much. He finds sarcasm amusing, not caring if he causes offence. He even deliberately insulted you and tried to undermine you with callous disregard for your feelings. You've heard him lie and gossip and slander everyone he talks about, and his clothes, and that hair. You'd think that someone so intent on making a spectacle of themselves would care more about their appearance. You suspect he has a problem with drugs or alcohol, and are almost sure that he steals and cheats others. You really can't stand him, and with good reason. Now, if you observe some thoughts and feelings like this going on in yourself, and you remember the work ideas and your aim, you will have to think about them in relation to this event. First, you stop criticizing, because it's a negative emotion, and the work teaches you that to stop expressing negative emotions is central to the process. And then you have to practice stop again and again as the thoughts and feelings return repeatedly, resisting your aim. Then you recognize that your personal mechanics are at work, since someone else finds this fellow quite charming and witty, even lovable, maybe his mother, and others take no note of him at all. So it is your subjective mechanical responses to him which are now at fault. Your negative emotions are always your own fault, but how can you possibly not object to him and his behavior? Then you remember that he is also subject to his mechanicalness and dead to the world, asleep in it. It dawns on you that he is not his behavior any more than you are your behavior. Having observed your own inability to behave always intentionally, you understand what being mechanical means, and that he has very little choice in the matter. You realize that his mean-spirited personality had to have been formed by pain and imitation, and that his constant snide remarks are an attempt to make others feel less than himself so that he can feel superior. You know that he actually feels very inferior and insecure, and that his personality is driven by these conditions. The moment of compassion enters you through understanding. You think, am I so different? You see that your criticism and slanderous thoughts of him aren't very different from his gossiping, slandering, insulting behavior. You verify that suspicion accommodates the facts to suit your negative attitude, while you are sitting in your own superior little niche, looking down on him, judging and condemning him for looking down on others. Is your feeling of superiority any more correct than his? Have you ever acted badly in order to get attention or power? Can you remember the last time you lied or gossiped or said an unkind word about someone? Today? It doesn't matter if your expression of these things is not like his. You see that they are the same negative emotions in action in him and in yourself. You understand insecurity and the pain of feeling inferior very well from personal experience and long-term self-observation. You experience an affinity with him. You realize that you do not know the real person. You only see the false personality, which is actually more painful to him than you. You feel remorse for being so critical and mean-spirited toward him. You are humbled and you feel the pain that you inflicted within yourself. You desire forgiveness and you need purity. You recognize that you have been given the immeasurable gift of the work and its ability to free you from negative emotions and the suffering they create. Then you remember that this person has not received that opportunity and you feel sympathy and compassion for him. A prayer arises in your heart that he be also blessed. You feel forgiven and you are freed. This more purified and enlightened state is an experience of your real I. Its consistent presence is built upon repeated experience. It is not necessary that you learn to like everything you consider bad or negative. And there is another point in esoteric teaching which gets misinterpreted regularly. The idea of learning to like what you dislike is an exercise meant to be practiced with discernment and an appropriate spiritual disposition of releasing your subjective requirements. If a man spits in the street in front of you, you do not have to like it. However, you must forgive him, knowing that he is unconscious of his imitated mechanics. You do not have to like what you dislike. It is only necessary that you forgive him so that you don't become negative. He does not know what he's doing. He's asleep. And so you can forgive him since he's already suffering the pangs of sleep, a condition you are now very familiar with. Often, this part of transformation teaching gets distorted into the practice of accepting everything passively, without conscience active, which will only lead to confusion. Sometimes, as in monasticism and misguided fourth way groups, this idea becomes the practice of creating more suffering or friction in order to generate more transformation. This approach does not work because creating suffering means missing the mark in this system. You can be assured that your everyday life is full of all the suffering and artifice you can handle to fuel your work for your lifetime. This is an example of one of the infinite possible experiences of transformation created in doing the work. It leaves you feeling purified, clearer, lighter, with a new perspective and tolerance, and a broader view with connected understanding. If you undertake these practices correctly and you persevere in them, you will find that you must struggle with many issues, and the same ones repeatedly. You will also find liberated authenticity. Notice how much choosing has to do with this process. To begin with, you choose to practice self-observation intentionally. You choose to give it your attention and effort. This is what is meant by doing the work willingly. You choose to stop your mechanics and consider your internal responses objectively in the light of the work ideas. You choose to accept what you see and take responsibility for it. You choose to remember your aim. You choose to allow yourself to be humbled and transformed. You choose with integrity the thoughts you think, the words you use, the emotions you consent to. You choose your actions and motives. You choose to forgive and externally consider. You choose which influences to which you submit yourself. It's just incredibly intelligent that something in you, higher than your vacillating personality, makes these choices. Real conscience needs to be that which chooses. Real conscience becomes active when you choose to make personality passive and follow the work. All of these profound things depend upon self-observation. In the work, transformation depends upon self-observation above all. This process, which amounts to intentionally pulling yourself up into a higher state of consciousness, must be put into practice an incalculable number of times in order to build a new psychological structure from which you have the perspective of developed understanding. A simple overview of the process, if you are practicing all of the work correctly, would look something like this. You observe something about yourself, your acquired personality, or some negative emotion which you feel and know must be changed. From the vantage point of self-observation, you have a foothold from which to say, "This is not I," and feeling the separation between observing I and personality I. Observing I is directly connected to real I, and it therefore feels more authentic than personality. The defining of this distance between observing I and acquired personality helps to accomplish inner separation. After you observed a specific thing and identified it, and you are intentionally working against it, you will have to practice inner separation and inner silence, directed attention, inner and outer stop, non-identification, and bring all of the ideas of the work to bear on the problem. As you observe the issue repeatedly and refuse to identify with it repeatedly, it moves farther and farther away from you over time until it becomes faint. It loses strength and sounds hollow and false. You will see what wrong work it is connected to in your psyche, and consequently be increasingly able to say, "This is not I" to it. Eventually, the issue that you are working on will be dissolved in the light of understanding and transcended. Usually, it takes a long time for self-observation to produce these results, but sometimes an issue you have to deal with will simply vanish as soon as you see it objectively. The results are the same in each case. You are free and more conscious, non-identified. Non-identification. A psychological state called non-identified in the work is a condition of detachment, not from life, but from the power and influences it has over you. There is a very subtle difference. It does not mean not caring about life and an unemotional dismissal of its significance. It means transcending your subjective responses to and requirements of life in favor of higher, more conscious emotions. It takes effort to achieve the self-transcendence of non-identification, but if you reach that state, the state itself feels effortless. It is lighter because it is not attached to the heavy, coarser energy of negative emotions. It feels clearer because from a higher perspective of consciousness, you can see more. You can see connections, scale and relativity, and this gives you understanding, which brings freedom and peace. The true form of this state must be reached through developed understanding. Understanding has force. It can build consciousness and create non-identification. You can sometimes jump into detachment temporarily without the understanding that accompanies developing a more permanent condition of non-identification. But be careful not to use this practice for emotionally disassociate escapism. The distortion of practice cannot build anything. It means missing the mark of the aim of the practice. Real non-identification is a conscious activity, even though a good deal of effort is in making personality passive. Personality is always concerned first with what it thinks it wants. You have to get to the point of not forever wanting what you think you want so that you can will the work and want what it teaches instead. Making your own will passive in this way is a very intentional, conscious activity. It requires energy and attention, and it is not a matter of passively abdicating responsibility or conscience. The ultimate and achievable result is wanting only God's will, which is the nature of the state of non-identification. Teachers and schools. The work is a very clean, pure path where sincerity, honesty, and integrity are essential, and the right aim is pursued from the beginning. The intellectual ideas of the work become emotional understanding through your personal practice. It is surely very clear that you must learn from someone who understands this path. You cannot get the right instruction in the work from someone who merely knows about it. Many people know the fourth way ideas thoroughly, but do not possess the developed understanding necessary to teach them from the right angle. Having a bad teacher in the work, whether an unscrupulous fraud or simply one who has no understanding, is a seriously dangerous situation that can damage, even cripple your psychology simply because it isn't taught with conscience or understanding and the true aim. Although the system contains vast intellectual ideas that you can study and ponder yourself, the transformational personal inner work absolutely requires one-to-one, face-to-face work with the teacher. An advanced student can teach the cosmology and basic practices under the direction of a teacher, but addressing your individual experiences, adjusting your practices, guiding you through the process, these things have to come from someone who has gained a degree of developed understanding by way of personal experience. An authentic teacher in the fourth way teaches from love, to preserve the teaching and to give it to others and to continue their own personal growth. A real teacher need not be a divine being or even a perfect one, but there are a few recognizable, verifiable requirements for the position. A teacher in the work needs to have personal integrity and a high standard of conscience. You should be able to see exemplary behavior and being. What your teacher says to you should lead you into understanding. The instructions you receive should also lead you deeper into understanding. You should be able to verify the results of employing your teacher's instructions and feel a new quality of being growing. This is perhaps where the greatest difficulty lies. No qualified teachers have been produced from the major groups descending from Gurdjieff, Uspensky and Nicole, because his teaching has been so distorted and removed from its aim and context by today's generation of teachers and schools. Numerous groups exist, from small conversational or study groups to international schools and organizations claiming thousands of members, but no real teachers. That means no real schools. Without question, the best possible circumstance in which to meet and practice the work is or would be an authentic school. If you are taking this path seriously, it is very beneficial to have a relationship with other serious students. You can learn from each other's experiences and compound your knowledge and understanding through discussion. And you can verify for each other the quality of your teacher. There are no currently known schools or teachers in this sense. In fact, there are many unscrupulous pseudo-teachers and fraudulent groups using the fourth way, or rather misusing it, for their own gain without concern for any harm they cause. Anyone interested in pursuing the fourth way needs to be very careful today when searching out a school. Be well read in the Gurdjieff, Uspensky and Nicole writings on the fourth way, particularly the psychological commentaries by Nicole. Ask lots of questions. Be willing to submit yourself to the work and to respect and value your teacher without letting go of the bit of real conscience you have alive in the magnetic center. The bit that knows that goodness is above truth. Remember that the nature of the Absolute is perfect goodness, and so do not submit yourself to anything that is not goodness. Do not let yourself be convinced that you will lose the work if you leave any particular group. The work does not belong to the school. Your real personal work belongs to you, and you can practice it, be in the work, anytime, anywhere. The work is designed so that you can develop a permanent faculty of perception, which is your own inner teacher. This is called the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. Okay, I'm going to bring it to an end there because what we come up to now is an introduction. It says this primer is written for persons who have some sense that there is more depth and potential to life and to our own nature than what we see around us. So I'm going to leave this for the next recording. Thank you very much. I'm enjoying this so much. It's resonating so much, and I really hope that it is with you. Thank you so much for being here, guys. Thank you.